In the lead up to the passage of the Trump tax cuts of a couple of years ago, a lot of promises were made. Just about everything that you could ever hope to imagine would be true of a set of tax cuts was promised. That it was going to, in fact, against all odds and reason, raise tax revenue somehow. It was going to stimulate job growth. It was going to lead to business investment. It was going to lead to jobs and wages and all of that. All of those promises were made. So it's been a couple of years, and there's only one thing we can say for sure was done, and that is that 1.8 to $2 trillion was transferred almost wholly to the richest people and corporations in the country. All the other stuff is speculation, but now we have a couple of years of data. So why don't we look at what's been going on and see if we can learn anything about this. Now, bear in mind initially, Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin said that the law would juice the nation's gross domestic product to 3%, which would be good, or as Trump said, 6%, which would be unheard of in modern American history, but that's what he promised, 6% gross domestic product growth. And so here's what we got. The economy grew 2.9% last year, exactly the same as in 2015 before the passage of the law. So
when that other person was president, the normal
I don't remember that
president.
person. George W.
Stop
I'm kidding. So here's the thing, like Mnuchin said 3%. Which is a reasonable promise to make considering that that's kind of what the economy was doing anyway. To say that it's gonna be 6%, that's impressive, and we didn't reach it. We reached 2.9, the same as we had before we took $2 trillion and lit it on fire effectively. So that's sort of a baseline idea of what was going on. We can look at year by year, by the way, or actually quarter by quarter. Let's take a look at the last few years in GDP growth. And you can see right there the line marking where the tax overhaul was adopted in the beginning to middle of 2017. And there has been some quarters that are not bad. And then overall, if you were to average that out, it looks a lot like late 2015 to 2017, honestly. And the price that you had for basically maintaining the level of GDP growth was, again, trillions of dollars. And some of it will just continually go up. So we always talk about it's like a $1.8 trillion thing. That's over the first decade, basically. But remember that at the end of that, the tax changes for regular families, they're supposed to end. It almost never actually works that way, but to the letter of the law, they're supposed to end. The corporate tax cut, the massive, effectively cutting in half how much corporations pay in tax, that is permanent. So that $1.8 trillion, that's just for the first 10 years. That is gonna continually go up year after year after year until these tax cuts are finally reversed.
You know, there was something else that I found out about the tax cuts last week, and I wanna talk about it because I think we repeatedly were finding out more ways. We knew just overall this was going to be bad for the people who need it the most, and this is going to be extra for no reason for the very, very, very rich and corporations.
Yeah, or no reason that most people would agree with anyway.
Right,
but yeah.
So there's an aspect of this, the federal child tax credit. I think everybody knows about that. It's a credit that it initially is supposed to be like an anti-poverty help, but the way it's kind of set up, it really is just a tax incentive. It's a tax credit because you can't get the maximum amount of money unless you make a certain amount. And so the people you would think who need it the most would be like single mothers, single fathers who don't make a lot of money. It would be nice to just get like a bonus because to help your kids. And that's not how it happens. You have to make a certain amount of money.
Because it's not an actual money that goes to you, it's a reduction in taxes. So unless you're paying a certain amount of taxes, you don't
can't get it
actually
back.
get it.
Exactly. And so that's kind of always been the problem with this. It's so even more, as part of this tax act, Trump doubled the maximum credit in this program, and it extended it to families who make as much as $400,000 a year, up from the max it was at $110,000. So now you can get back up to $2,000 if you make $400,000 a year. And so there's a woman profile.
Poverty for people who make $400,000 a year.
And there's a woman who makes minimum wage. She worked 5 jobs, so a bunch of different part-time jobs, as well as her full-time job, earning under $15,000. And she got an increase of $75. She didn't get the maximum amount because she doesn't make enough.
She doesn't make enough to benefit.
Right, but it was extended for really, really rich people. I just can't imagine thinking people who make $110,000 a year don't necessarily need a child tax credit, but thinking that for some reason this needs to be extended to people who make almost $500,000 a year.
Yeah.
Why?
Yeah, it was a messed up law. Yeah, and it was clearly written to benefit certain types of people.
Yeah.
Let's go back to the charts for just a sec. If you want to take a look at, well, okay, so the overall the GDP is not growing, but by the way, whenever we look at something like GDP growth, you can say we look at it before and after a law, but that's not the only thing that happens. It could be that something bad happened and the tax cuts helped to offset some of that. So let's look at a different measure. What about job growth? Well, take a look at this chart, try to make sense of that. I don't know, it's up and down a lot. If the average is higher in the red than in the blue, it is not discernible to human vision.
Right.
It certainly doesn't seem as if it exploded job growth. Now, to the credit of at least the last couple of years, if not specifically the tax cut law, take a look at this chart. Average hourly earnings has continued to trend up. It was already trending up in 2015. It continued to do so. Now, bear in mind that even the red section is still barely above inflation. So in real terms, you're not necessarily making any more money from year to year.
And right, the key word
But
there.
that's the most positive chart I was able to find.
Yeah, but the key word there, you said it yourself, continued. Because luckily for Trump, he wasn't handed the same economy that President Obama was handed. Now, albeit not perfect, but it wasn't the same.
Yeah, exactly. And one thing that we did find a big change from before the law to after the law, and it was 100% predicted on this network, if not on the show because we didn't exist then. You know what did go up? Let's take a look at this. Stock buybacks skyrocketed in 2018 because suddenly these corporations, which were paying a lot less in taxes, found that they had a bunch more money. Now, Republicans, conservatives would have you believe that if you simply give them a bunch of money, they will just make a whole bunch more jobs. But if you know anything about supply and demand, that is not at all how anything works. They make jobs when they need the employees to make products that are in demand. That's how it works. And if you're giving the money to the rich who are not going to spend the money rather than the poor who would, then you're not generating more demand for products when you do something like that. Thus, you're not generating any reason for jobs to go up. But they do have a bunch more money, and so what do they do with it? They buy their stock back to gain more control over the corporation. So technically they're using the money, but not in a way that has any positive impact on the economy for regular people. This happens every time they do one of these tax cuts. It was predicted in advance, and there you're seeing it. So it's very good for corporations, but not in a way that necessarily increases wages or jobs or helps out the economy as a whole. So that's the first couple of years. Hey, maybe the next couple of years will be good. But we do know one thing, by the way, you know what else went up? The federal deficit this year was $984 billion. And we said when you suddenly take in a lot less money in tax revenue, deficits are gonna go up. And they say, no, by the power of my Gryffindor magic, somehow you can take in less money, but the deficit will go down. Turns out it didn't. Now, there's no trigger in the bill where if it turns out all of their promises didn't come true, that it gets canceled or reversed or anything like that. The rich and the corporations, they still keep all that money, and those corporate tax cuts are still permanent, even though everything they said would happen did not, and everything we predicted came true. The law remains and the rich benefit.
Exactly. How proud are you of that line there?
Which line?
The power of my Gryffindor.
I wanted to work it in all day. Yeah, so I'm probably gonna do it in later segments, honestly. That's my new catchphrase. For more political news breakdowns, interviews, stories of activism, and me trying my hardest to care about the occasional big celebrity news story, subscribe to our YouTube channel at youtube.com/The Damage Report. And you can ring the bell wherever it is so you don't miss anything.